welcome everyone to joining our latest market trends report. I know a lot of you guys have attended these before, but before we go into the direct report, I'm just going to give an overview of who's on the call from Ambition. So we've got Christine and Ben that cover our management and senior management level in my team, and then we've got Grace that works alongside other colleagues in the team on our non-management level. For those of you that don't know me, obviously I'm responsible for managing the team and then tend to get involved at the more senior end of the market, both sort of UK and internationally. So onto the data, just so you've got an idea of where this has come from. To give you some numbers, we've had just over 350 marketing and BD professionals respond to the individual survey. So all of these people are currently working within a marketing and business development or communications role within professional services, both in the UK, and we've also expanded it to going out to some of our European network as well. So it does cover sort of that whole piece. The client data survey, which you'll see in the second half of the report, is a combination of firms' internal recruitment teams and HR teams on specific subject matters, and then also from the line managers. So that's really anything from sort of head of or director level. So just to give you some context around the data that we've got, obviously you could see just for the bullet points to put on there for anyone joining slightly later, that's the context to what we're going to present today. There will be a full report with our own analysis and context that will be available in the next few days, but we obviously wanted to sort of showcase this to you guys before we release that into the external markets. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Christine, who's going to talk through the first couple of slides from our individual sort of candidate responses.
Thanks, Ben. So the first topic that I'm going to talk about is pay and promotion. So we were interested to see how many individuals have received an appraisal in the last 6 months to discuss their career development. So if you look at the first image on the left-hand side, 67%, so 2/3 of people surveyed said yes, which is really encouraging to see. Firms are aware of how many opportunities there are in the wider market right now, and they're ensuring that they're retaining as many staff as much as they can by setting goals and expectations and giving individuals an understanding of their career trajectory. Following on from the appraisals, we also wanted to understand how many people have been given a pay rise / promotion in the past 6 months. Nearly 60% of individuals said yes, while 42% said no. The people in the 42% bracket are going to be the most vulnerable to the external market, as they will have an awareness of how many opportunities there are and will be more open to changing roles. Of course, there's a slight grey area here, as some of the individuals may have started a new role recently, which means they wouldn't be eligible for these, or salary reviews, etc. are done yearly, so they'll be coming up soon. So I think really the percentage of no would probably be slightly lower in reality. Looking at the graph on the right-hand side, we also thought it'd be interesting to see what percentage increase people had received when it comes to pay. The majority of individuals received an increase of up to 10%, whilst only 1/3 received an increase higher than 10%. Now, all levels in the external market right now, we're seeing pay increases towards the top end of this, with most people largely landing an increase of kind of circa 15% plus. Obviously, this is probably a bit more higher at the senior end. It'll be really interesting to see over the next few months how firms will react to this and if the external market stabilises when it comes to pay increases. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is hybrid working. So if you want to do the next slide, please. Thanks, Ben. We do obviously appreciate that this topic has been discussed a really large amount, but we are still being asked daily by candidates and clients about hybrid working, so we thought it was important to touch upon it in this survey. So on the left-hand side, you can see from the graph that the vast number of employees want 2 days or less in the office, compared to the graph on the right, where a large amount of employers want staff in 3 days a week. There are a number of firms right now that we are speaking to who have a sort of 3-day policy in place for people to come into the office, but we haven't really been seeing this being enforced yet. I think it's really at the manager's discretion, and yeah, it seems to be quite fluid. So it'll be interesting to see if kind of firms start to enforce that. There's obviously a bit of a disconnect between what employers want versus what employees want. So again, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next 6 months or so, and if there'll be a shift from either side. So moving on to key priorities for employees, we were keen to understand employees' key priorities for the remainder of 2022. People were able to choose 3 options. So the most frequent options picked were culture, so with staff being back in the office a lot more now compared to probably what it was in 2020 and 2021. Culture is obviously a lot more important, a lot more prevalent. Bonus, so salary and pay is always a priority for individuals, so it's no surprise that this was one of the top priorities picked. Team hiring, we know that everyone is stretched and very busy right now, so I think everyone's really looking for additional support. And staff training as well, you know, this could be dependent on the level, and more junior staff wants training and development in certain areas. It was interesting to note as well the diversity and inclusion, we thought that might be slightly higher. So yeah, that was just a point to note. We're also interested to see what other priorities employers are keen for the firms to focus on. So we gave a free text box for individuals to fill out with some of the answers on the right-hand side of the slide there. So continue with the theme of priorities. We also wanted to know what was important to individuals when joining a new firm. We gave people a free text box and have listed their answers below. So a couple to highlight are people and team culture, a clear understanding of progression options, senior management expectation of marketing and clear strategic visions. These are all interesting actually, because these are points that candidates wouldn't necessarily gauge or really get a feel for from a job spec. So it's really important for firms to highlight these during the interview process as much as possible. And just one more thing to mention on this as well was information around sustainability and ESG policies. So as I'm sure you know, lots of you are talking about right now, ESG and climate change is a massive priority on firms' agendas right now. And we've seen this really being translated into the BD market with lots of new roles in ESG, climate change, renewable energy, natural resources, etc. So yeah, so I'm going to pass you over to Grace, who's going to continue with the employee survey.
So following on from Christine, another key area that we really wanted to have a look at was changing jobs. So given how well job flow has been so far this year, we were keen to find out how long individuals were looking at staying in their current roles before considering a move. Particularly at my level, the non-management level, we do tend to see a little bit more movement than we do at the management level. And as you can see on the left-hand side graph, the highest percentage was 28%. So the majority of individuals are willing to stay in their current role for 1 to 2 years before considering something new. And the others are all pretty fairly even. Of course, these individuals can be at different levels. So for example, assistants and executives are going to probably be more likely to consider moves in 1 to 2 years than those at management level, or again, individuals at different stages in their careers. And of course, not all candidates are going to be actively looking. So this data can be a little bit of a grey area. On the right-hand side, another area that we have been looking at is counteroffers. We have really seen an increase in firms giving out counteroffers across all levels. So we wanted to see how many individuals would actually consider these. So 60%, nearly 2/3 of individuals said they would consider a counteroffer. So I think this just shows that a lot of people, you know, although they may be happy in their current roles, they're only kind of really looking at external opportunities because they want additional compensation or career progression opportunities, which they don't think are available in their current firms. Again, this data can be a little bit of a grey area, as not all of the candidates are going to be open to new opportunities, but we still thought it was a really interesting question to ask. Next slide, please. So the next part we're going to be talking about is another area that we've definitely become more prominent, has been topics around diversity and inclusion. So on the left-hand side image, we asked a simple question of, do individuals review a firm's D&I policy when considering a new role? And encouragingly, 58% of people said yes, but for 42% of individuals, it was still not a priority. So there's still a lot of work to kind of be done on that D&I piece. And then on the right-hand side, we expanded that question and actually gave a free text box to allow individuals to discuss specific points on what they would like to improve with D&I. And some interesting points to mention here were recruiting from a wider range of universities. And then there were two separate points, which I believe have some similarities. So one was involving more junior colleagues in building D&I initiatives. This could basically indicate that they don't feel that they are involved in the D&I process. And then the second point I wanted to highlight ties in with the previous point, and that is where individuals are looking for more diversity at the management and board level. So this again could kind of indicate that individuals are not seeing enough diversity in their firm. So yeah, obviously now I'm going to be passing over to my colleague Ben, who is going to begin discussing our employer findings.
So the next few slides I'm going to talk through focus more on the market trends from the employer side. So firstly, it's worth noting that 2022 has been a massively busy year for legal BDM market. We've had a consistently high volume of roles coming through since the beginning of the year across all levels of seniority, which hasn't shown any signs of slowing down just yet. As part of our survey, we asked employers for the reasons that their vacancies have come around. And as you'll see from the graph on the right, we've seen a real mix of replacement hires and newly created roles. Very few of the clients that took part in our survey, in fact, just 10% have said that they haven't hired at all this year. Something we felt would be a hugely positive sign for the sector is that 84% of the clients we surveyed said they had hired newly created roles this year. This is definitely a trend we've seen with vacancies coming to us, as lots of the law firms we're working with have been increasing headcount across their BD and comms teams as part of their strategic growth plans. Some of the key BD areas we've seen growth with this year have been around the ESG focus roles and also legal tech. We've also noted a high volume of dedicated client development roles, particularly at the manager level and above. So the next slide is around the counter offers, which I know we've already touched on previously on the candidate side. So we've actually seen a big increase on candidates receiving counter offers, which is unsurprising given how difficult it can be to backfill roles in this market. So we were a little surprised to see that only 42% of clients we surveyed said they had been that they had counter offered employees who were looking to leave, especially when 60% of the candidates we surveyed said they would actually consider a counter offer. However, I do think a lot of this will come down to the reasons the employee is given to leave. We rarely see lateral moves in this market. So if someone's chosen to leave their role purely because there aren't the career progression opportunities they want in their current firm, then an offer of a salary increase won't always be enough to keep them on board. So the next slide is around hiring trends. And as you'll see from the graph on the left, almost 3/4 of the clients we spoke to said they have concerns over the salary demands of the external candidates compared to their existing teams, which I know Christine touched upon earlier. With the cost of living rises we've seen, it's unsurprising that candidates are looking for a considerable salary increase when looking for new roles. And employers are very aware now that they need to be as competitive as possible to secure that best talent. As you'll see from the graph on the right, firms have found the manager and senior manager level roles have been the hardest to recruit at this year. I think this is largely down to individuals coming into junior manager roles much higher up the salary bandings than pre-COVID times. And those salary bandings haven't really changed that much since then. This is having a massive knock-on effect to where those individuals can go before they're experienced enough to progress to the next level, so senior manager and head of positions. So when we asked our clients what challenges they faced when recruiting, the highest response we had was that there was a lack of high caliber candidates available. Although I think this is very much down to the hiring managers often having to choose just one or two applicants when they're interviewing, largely down to the huge number of vacancies on the market and competition from other firms. This is definitely the most competitive talent war we've seen in the BDM space. Candidate expectations in terms of career progression and salaries were also seen as a big challenge when recruiting. The graph on the right was quite an interesting one for us. There's almost 2/3 of the employers who took part in the survey said that they were willing to recruit BD and marketing managers from outside of legal firms. And to be fair, we're often told this when we're taking on new positions and taking part in vacancy briefings. However, the reality that we see is that there are rarely offers coming through for those candidates from outside of the sector for BD manager roles. Although 32% of those surveys have suggested that while they would be open to these candidates, it's actually the partners who tend to be a bit more reluctant for this. I think this is mostly due to them needing those BD managers to come in, know the markets, and kind of really be able to hit the ground running. So now I'm going to pass you back to Ben Curl, who's going to talk you through predictions for the market for the next 6 months.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I'll just talk you through these two graphs. So the graph on the left obviously leads on from a couple of the previous slides, and for those of you enough lucky to read my blog a few months ago, you will know that this is an area that I've been sort of banging a drum for a few months, really, because we have seen really big salary growth, particularly in that first-time management space, that I believe is going to have to change the bandings going forward. 68% of the marketing and BD leadership that answered this survey do believe that it's going to have to result in some permanent change. To give you some just sort of additional context to this, and I know, you know, the salary numbers might be slightly different dependent on whereabouts you're based, but if you were to take sort of the London figure of a BDM, you know, the bandings, and you know, we've gone back to 2003 and the bandings are pretty much the same as what they are now in terms of a manager being between 50 and 70k, and it not really going much higher than that. The issue, you know, what has happened this year in that area in particular is that first-time managers are now going in halfway up that banding. So I think as a result, there's going to have to be sort of permanent change, because I think even if the market does die down a little bit, which we probably do anticipate over the next 6 months, it's going to be difficult for firms to then start paying first-time managers next year 50, 55k if they've hired a bunch of people this year on 60k. And also going back to sort of some of the previous points, it also creates a bit of a challenge for firms around how you then retain or keep developing these first-time managers. Because if they're coming in already up the banding and firms' expectation is they are still doing 4 years at manager level before they become a senior manager, there isn't the gap in the current bandings to keep giving them, you know, yearly salary reviews and keeping within the existing banding. So I think naturally it's that part of the market that's really going to drive the move upwards, because on the flip side of that, you might have senior managers who are not that far away from some of these first-time managers. So I think, you know, one thing that we'll see from how busy the market has been this year, not just the people that are moving, is there will be some permanent change, I believe, to those salary brackets, really. The graph on the right touches upon the hiring plans for the next 6 months, which, given the sort of predicted economic doom and gloom for everyone this winter, it's pretty encouraging that 58% of people thought that they did have new headcount planned. I'm fully aware that this figure could change if the economic situation changed, but most firms appear to be very positive around the next 6 months. Our opinion probably is a little bit that, you know, it will stay a good market, but we probably will see more firms, you know, go back into more of a cycle of replacement roles and, you know, the odd new bit of headcount rather than the quite large quantities that we've seen, particularly in the first 6 months of this year. But again, it's obviously a very good indication of resilience of the market, and, you know, within professional services, you are relatively well safeguarded against all sort of economic ups and downs. The only thing that really knocked us off course was COVID, and touch wood, we won't have any more lockdowns this winter. But those were sort of interesting points that came back from people in BD marketing leadership teams. The next slide is around, we asked sort of HR teams around sort of the key priorities for their firm. And we allowed them to pick sort of 2 areas because we really wanted to see what the priority was. I'm sure everyone in HR would love to have picked all 5, or potentially more, but we allowed them to pick 2 so we get a bit of a clear indication of, you know, what are the key priorities for a firm. So you've effectively got sort of D&I, again, bang at the top of everybody's or 78% of people's focus. As you can see, sort of from the employee side, and obviously 58% of the potential employees wanting to understand a firm's positioning on D&I. This isn't really a surprise, and again, it's something that I think has come on a lot in the last particularly 2-3 years. There's still a long way to go in terms of lots of different stuff that firms can be doing, but I think firms are fully aware that it is a really key decision-making factor for people, whereas it might not have been in the not so recent past. Sustainability, ESG, again, as the guys have commented previously, it's been really noticeable this year that marketing and BD roles focusing on this subject matter have been started to come through into the market. Where we'd probably seen it prior to this year was maybe it being sort of a bit of an add-on to maybe an energy marketing role or something of that description, but we're actually had a number of roles this year that are involved in planning sort of the marketing and the BD project for the firm around the topic of ESG and renewables, some massive political and societal issues. So we do anticipate, this continues to happen. Where we've seen it so far have probably been in, the really big firms, but we expect probably that to happen and firms to continue to hire in this manner. We also just wanted to get a bit of context from our clients around, okay, what actually have they done around D&I this year? Everyone's saying it's top of the agenda, but what physically have they done? Because I know there's always a little bit of opinion from people that it's just maybe a little bit of lip service and that side of things. So we put the question to them, and this was some of the results that we had back. So we had unconscious bias training, featured quite a lot from different firms, which is great. Partnerships with third parties and networks. I think one thing that was also quite prominent was just understanding, what do the internal employees want. So surveys like we've done in the past are specifically around D&I and understanding what they need to do to change that. Mentor internships. I know there's been a lot of talk around sort of reverse mentoring and having people who are maybe at a more junior level, mentoring somebody who's maybe from a different background in terms of personal and also professional life. So we've seen that featured quite a bit as well. So I think there are some stuff coming through from firms. I think it is a bit individual. Probably some firms are further ahead than others, but I think if you want to be attractive to you guys listening, or if you're a hiring manager listening, it's clearly something that people are going to want to see, people actually doing something internally to retain the staff, but also to help attract new staff, really. The sort of final part that I just wanted to discuss was just around, I guess, sort of some things that we maybe see in the next 6 months. The top one, and again, this will feature in our actual report. I sent out a free text box to BD leaders and just asked them around, okay, what do you think are going to be the main subject matters, focus matters for you over the next 6 months? Where do you think sort of the BD marketing focus is going to be? And obviously, we've got a big theme of this ESG and green economy and renewables, and those came up pretty much in everyone's responses. So I can't tell from that exactly whether it's going to be a whole bunch of ESG focused roles or whether that's making it sort of built into everyone's BD roles, that within those sector or practice groups roles there's a focus on ESG on that, but it's clearly going to be something that is going to be at the top of firms wanting to obviously appear that they're taking it seriously in the external market, but also probably capitalize on it from a business perspective, because particularly the renewable space, the green economy, that's new revenue sources for all of these firms as well. So I think it's from an appearance perspective in terms of how they're appealing to their clients, but also about a business angle of making sure that X firm is the person that X client's going to pick to advise them on whatever subject matter. So that was quite interesting. All of the political stuff going on in the world, it's not surprising to see, stuff like trade and sanctions in there, and disputes as well. Obviously, there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, particularly with the Russia situation, etc. So, it's not surprising that featured. The M&A piece, I think, was quite interesting. I know there's been some news recently about, obviously, if there is a bit of an economic downturn, could there be more mergers between law firms? Obviously, that has been at a record low recently because of the profits that law firms have been making. But do we again see, the legal side, more mergers between law firms, plus also in the wider economic sector, will firms, will there be more frequency in mergers and acquisitions as we go through? So those were the topics that came straight from the horse's mouth, if you like. I don't know exactly how that's all going to appear in terms of sort of BD and marketing jobs in the external market, but it's obviously something interesting to note. The stuff at the bottom really is sort of our, I guess, sort of feel for the next 6 months. I think the market's going to stay pretty strong in our opinion. We're yet to see any real downturn. August was our busiest August, since I've been doing this, which it was about 8 or 9 years now. So that we didn't really have any form of summer lull, which was quite interesting, because even in really good years previously, we have seen August can be a bit of a challenging month for us, but that hasn't appeared to be the case this year. But we do maybe expect a little bit of a slowdown on the newly created roles, and maybe us moving back into a more pre-COVID world where it is a little bit more of a replacement cycle of opportunities in the market. One thing that we've seen more prominent this year, and off the back of the fact that it is really candidate led, is firms who do have multiple offices, whether that's multiple offices in the UK or Europe or even globally in some respects. Firms looking at talent in multiple locations. So even if their current headcount is in London, could we engage people in the Paris market, in the Munich market, in Brussels, wherever it might be. So we expect that to continue to happen, partly because obviously those roles quite often have a European or EMEA feel to it. So a lot of the partners and the stakeholders you're dealing with are quite often not in the same office with you anyway. So that there's the opportunity to do that. And also, near enough every firm, as we've referenced right at the beginning of the presentation, is offering some form of hybrid working. So if you're up in Glasgow, you might be happy to come down to London for 2 days a week, whereas previously you probably wouldn't want to have done it for 5. So we expect that to continue. As mentioned again, I do expect to see some form of realignment of salaries coming through, because I think we are going to get down the line and they're just not going to be fit for purpose. And not masses. I don't think it's got to be 20 grand more at manager level, but slight alignment of 60 to 80k for a manager, I think will probably transfer into the norm. We have seen some firms this year overpay budgets, and again there'll be a bit more data on that in the full report, but I think broadly within the sector you will see a slight realignment of certain areas, both at manager and non-manager level really. And we do expect it to still continue to be a candidate-led market. All of the conditions are there for that to still be the case. We're still most of the time doing at least the first stage remote interviews, and that allows candidates to interview for a lot more jobs than they would do if they had to think of 5 dentist appointments a week. There's also the abundance of roles out there, so firms know they're going to need to compete for talent. And I think the reality of the situation is individuals know that they can get more money externally than internally. But for us, whilst that creates a market for us, what we would also say is, 60% of you have said you would consider a counter offer. So, have those discussions internally with your current firm first, and see, if the main reason for you looking to leave is solely to keep pace with the external market from a monetary perspective. Have those conversations internally, because it's quite often you'll be surprised at what you potentially could get. But we do expect it to continue to be a candidate-led market, just purely on a numbers basis. The number of jobs are outstripping the number of candidates, and firms are reluctant to look at a talent pool outside of professional services. So, you don't have to be a genius to work out that there's more jobs and more candidates. There's still going to be a candidate-led market at most opportunities. Obviously, the more senior you get, there's not 5 heads of BD roles coming on a week. So, that market might play out slightly different, but where the bulk of the teams sit in that BDM, senior exec space, it's still very much going to be driven in a candidate approach. So that's really sort of the presentation from us. We did want to try and keep it to 30 minutes because we know how busy you guys are. But as mentioned at the start, and if you have joined sort of after we kicked off, then we'd also welcome any questions on the presentation or the market, or anything that's maybe more individual to you, because we do appreciate this is quite a generic bit of data, but I hope you found it interesting. But please do reach out to us. You will all receive a full copy of the report, which will have some additional commentary from us alongside the data. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again for everybody that has contributed to the data, be it from a manager perspective or individual perspective. We do really appreciate the continued support. We will also be running our next set of data for January next year. So we'll try and obviously do this again. So yeah, thanks very much for joining today. We look forward to seeing you in 6 months' time. And if you do have any questions, do reach out to any of us on any subject matter. Thanks a lot.